And welcome back. That was President Trump speaking from the White House just a little while ago, announcing a permanent ceasefire in Syria. The president said that all sanctions will be lifted against Turkey in exchange for the country stopping all combat operations in that nation, in Syria. Now, this comes after the president claimed a big victory there. Trump tweeted, quote, "Big success on the Turkey-Syria border. Safe zone created. Ceasefire has held and combat missions have ended. Kurds are safe and have worked very nicely with us. Captured ISIS prisoners secured." And Russian forces are deployed in Syria under a deal with Turkey. Russian military officials say the Kurds need to pull back from the Syrian border or else they will be steamrolled. The Kurds have until Tuesday night to get out of the border area. Now, this comes after the U.S. pulled some troops out of the region last week, but very, very few. That's where I want to welcome in our next guest, Jessie Jane Duff, Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. That's Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. Great to see you, my friend. So this, to me, looks like a big win for the president. Of course, the Russians are going to saber rattle. But I think Turkey they were between a rock and a hard place, right? They're still in NATO. They need to buy military hardware from us. And Trump was about to cripple their economy. They see what he did economically to Iran. They're hurting. Turkey didn't want any part of that. I think they tried. They failed. But fire hold.
Well, that's yet to be seen, and I appreciate that the president said that he said flat out, we never can estimate what goes on in the Middle East. However, you hit the nail on the head. Erdogan's no dummy. He saw what was going on in Iran, and he knew that the president was very serious, that you're going to protect ethnic minorities, and he worked with the Kurds to get them out of the area. This particular zone is because Erdogan has 3 million refugees that have fled into his country from Syria. He wants to get 2 million of them back into Syria because they're displaced and they're shattering his economy as it is. They're really creating a lot of chaos for him as a president. It's decreasing his popularity. Of course, that's a strain and stress upon Turkey. Now, what I'm really disgusted with is how our own conservative side had really wanted to military men in the harm's way with no justification for a national security means. What really bothers me is when you keep continually talk about ISIS, but we meanwhile are got them in the face of potentially Russia, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and yet no means to defend themselves because they weren't even authorized to be in a combatant role while in Syria. President Obama placed us there without any opportunity to really take in any combat role, only to advise.
Yeah,
and
Jessie,
I just want people to say, stop.
Let me ask you this. On that note, I want you to continue on. But our guys, the way I saw this, and these were mostly Tier 1 operators, they were really human shields. We just had them there so that Russia and Turkey wouldn't start dropping bombs on the Kurds, right? Our guys were sitting ducks and they were human shields.
That's what I started calling them on Twitter because I was getting very frustrated. I was going on another network and continually getting, quote unquote, beat up by these Middle Eastern experts who seem to understand every city and location in Syria, which you and I probably don't know the name of. But what it boiled down to was they wanted us to stay there because as long as we were there, we were human shields to stop any type of attack. And that's ludicrous. I flat out said, you're speculating. You don't know that. I said, I've been talking about Erdogan going into Syria for months now, at least weeks. We've known this, and we were talking about the safe zone for a very long time now. So this was no surprise. Well, I want people to understand that when you start talking about Iraq, that, well, this is going to be like Iraq. We pulled out of Iraq. Well, Lindsey Graham, let me explain the difference between Iraq and Syria. Your Congress authorized for us to be in Iraq. We were in a combatant role in Iraq. Let's go back to Vietnam. And between 1960 and 1965, we had 750 to 1,500 military personnel based there as advisors. Fast forward, 50,000 Americans were killed years later. It never stayed in that advisory role. I never trusted when we start off as advisors, and as the president said, we were supposed to be there 30 days. 8 years later, we're still there.
Yeah, but Jessie, you and I were bouncing tweets off one another. We were of like mind on this. We both said the same thing, right? I mean, we often collaborate. If Congress wants war in Syria, vote for war in Syria, Nancy Pelosi.
Vote for it.
Vote for it. Hold the vote. Own it, vote for it, and then the president as commander-in-chief can decide whether or not to deploy the troops. But what Congress did to me was cowardly and reprehensible.
Of course.
Pointing fingers at Donald Trump, but not taking the vote and owning the conflict in Syria.
Yes, President Trump flat out said this is what I'm going to do. And if the Congress had any issue with it, they should have resolved this under President Obama. They basically decided that it was no problem because it wasn't their kid over there. They had no issue with any of this going on in Syria. It was left alone. President Obama got a major pass putting those troops in Syria under no congressional authorization. And he was utilizing the authorization to use military force, which was a law passed in 2014, but was designed against an imminent threat to the homeland, such as al-Qaeda. So he's stretching it that ISIS was maybe an offshoot of that, et cetera, et cetera. He really elongated a law to a point that it would have probably broke, and then everybody turned away and forgot about it. Now, the Kurds, I understand that a lot of people feel that we have been disloyal or we abandoned. First of all, we were never there to protect the Kurds. Let's be very clear. As much as I appreciate their sacrifice, we sacrifice with them. It was a dual agreement. They knew this. They knew we weren't going to be there indefinitely. And I think they've run one heck of a PR campaign against the United States and played the sympathy card.
Yeah,
when
I
in
agree.
reality, there are major factions, different factions of Kurds. You've got them in Iraq, you've got them in Iran, you have them in Turkey, and you have them in Syria. They're not all the same group nor people.
No, they're not. And let's face it, the president was right. There are factions within the Kurds that do align with some of our enemies. Not to mention that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they're well known to use terror proxies. So our guys weren't ensured insulation from any kind of conflict while they were on the ground in Syria.
No.
I don't like the fact that we had a couple of hundred special operators there. They didn't have heavy weapons, right? Mostly with small arms, light arms. This was absolutely ridiculous. And like you say, Jesse, we went there to lend assistance to the Kurds. We never said we're going to permanently embed with you for the rest of your lives and fight alongside you until the end of time. That's why I don't understand this hysteria when we leveraged a little foreign policy here.
I'm very disappointed, too, to be honest with you, because Lindsey Graham really has always been a war hawk. But in this particular situation, can you give me one national security reason that our men have to be over there to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic?
Right.
Because that's what they signed up for. They didn't sign up for to be a human shield. And Lindsey Graham, of all people, knows this. And I wonder often if the John McCain ghost haunts him, because John McCain was a big advocate for us to get into Syria. And we were embedded with a lot of people that were dirty players at many times. Syrian Defense Forces, many of them had been renamed, who were part of the PKK from what I gathered. I could be wrong with that, but I've gathered this. And our own State Department identified that Kurdish group, the PKK, as a terrorist organization because of the terrorist activities they have committed against Turkey. Turkey had not made this up. That was actually factually accurate. So, when you start talking about our troops we're abandoning anybody, I take great offense to that, because when you look at the thousands of lives that Americans have shed on foreign soil for the last 200 years that we have been in existence, starting from the Tripoli, we fought there, the Marines, it's in our Marine hymn. We have always died for the sake of others to be free. And yet in the background, we got these war hawks that either have some contract or some profit or some other hidden agenda, because many of those that you and I look at on Twitter, we were raising an eyebrow. Why are you advocating for more conflict when there's no national security means? Now, when it comes to ISIS, I say this all the time. We have thousands of troops still based in Iraq that are authorized to be there.
Right.
If you have a resurgence of ISIS, you can have a rapid response.
That's
but
right.
Those 1,000 men there were not the only reason to squelch, could not be depended upon to stop this mass chaos from 4 different countries, one being a NATO ally.
Couldn't agree with you more, and you answered your own question. Those war hawks, the Democrats, the neocons, they have big donors in those military hardware companies. Very big donors.
And it's unfortunate.
Trillions of dollars over the decades coming through. Jessie Jane Duff, retired gunnery sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Always great to see you, my friend.
Thank you.